What's the boldest risk an automotive company has ever taken? Was it GM introducing the Hydra-Matic to a populous use to driving manuals? Was it Ford going for the youth market with the Mustang? Was it Chrysler's various mergers, or GM's various discarding of brands? Is it the Cybertruck? Is it Tesla in general? I don't know. This is all just off the top of my head, so I'm sure there are a bunch I'm missing and I want to hear about them in the comments, but what are the moments in automotive history that have truly represented pure risk for only the vaguest hope of potential reward? Because if I'm honest, I can't think of any that's more openly brazen than what Jaguar's doing right now. It is a plan so drastic, so completely out there, at least in my opinion, that I can hardly imagine how this is anything other than a soft launch for a grand closing. But it's part of an ongoing saga for a British automaker that was owned by an American automaker and is now owned by an Indian automaker, and has experienced any number of dizzying highs and demoralizing lows in the past few decades. But are the highs high enough to justify the brand's continued survival? Or are the lows too low to get under? Another big-name automaker in danger? It must be the end of the month, cause I'm the Roman and this is the Roman Report. Let's hit it.
Roman Report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars.
Okay, so I literally just got done talking about Stellantis facing hard times last month, and how CEO Carlos Tavares may need to step down to avoid catching all sorts of flack from people who are laying the downfall of the company at his feet, but how he might not leave because he can't really pin it all on one guy, and what do you mean he just announced his retirement? I mean, I guess it was only a matter of time, but it genuinely seems like companies are accelerating change to keep up with where they think the industry will be before it actually gets there. Change is necessary. Evolution is necessary. But different companies are going to go about it in different ways. You see, our lead story this month, our only story this month, is Jaguar Land Rover's announcement at the end of September that they would be investing some £500 million to turn their 61-year-old factory in Halewood, Merseyside, England, into a state-of-the-art facility capable of meeting the demands of Jaguar Land Rover's Reimagine initiative, which intends to see all their brands go fully electric by 2030. Granted, Jaguar Land Rover is far from the only car company to vow to go fully electric within the next decade or so. But I can't think of any gasoline-powered automaker planning to go zero emissions as quickly as the Jaguar leg of this equation, which will purportedly go fully electric by 2025, with the first new EVs making it to consumers in 2026, utilizing a different platform than what the I-Pace has been using. Now, this isn't exactly new information, since Jaguar announced in 2021 that the plan was to be fully electric within 5 years. However, 2021 was also the year where they essentially ditched all progress they had made on a fully electric XJ after a 9-figure investment had been spent developing it. So it might make you question just how up to the task the company really is for this type of strategic change, you know? Or maybe it reinforces one's confidence that they really are committed to getting this right, no matter the cost. But the gamble I alluded to in the intro is the wildest part of this plan. The company is taking a gap year. Yes, there's going to be a year-long period where you won't be able to buy a new Jaguar, because none will be made. It's an incredibly bold strategy for any capitalist venture, particularly one that's faced the struggles Jaguar has faced in recent years, with a Road and Track report from February noting that while the brands under the Land Rover umbrella have moved a total of some 280,000 units for the year ending last March, the number had dropped to just 43,000 worldwide for Jaguar. Only 8,000 of which were in the United States. In an interview with Autocar back in August, Jaguar managing director Rawdon Glover elaborated on the strategy, noting that in parts of Europe, no new Jaguars would be available as of the end of 2024, and the UK will also see production dry up in early 2025. This follows from Jaguar's announcement earlier this year that they were discontinuing basically their entire lineup, as the final XE, XF, and F-Type cars rolled off the factory line back in May, and the E-Pace Hybrid and I-Pace Electric will also fall by the wayside by year's end, which means the sole surviving Jaguar is going to be the F-Pace. Yes, the iconic manufacturer of roadsters and sporty performance vehicles is depending on an SUV to hold down the fort until 2026, when Jaguar plans to release their electric GT model, which the company claims will produce a power output greater than any Jaguar ever built. But that's cold comfort to dealers, who are rightfully furious about the notion that there will be a period of close to a year with no new Jaguars being released. In fact, dealers in Canada pursued legal action against the company for compensation over how much money this brand reinvention is costing them. Automotive News Canada reported in June that a joint lawsuit was being planned against the Canadian wing of Jaguar Land Rover, not just due to the drastic reduction in inventory, which would see Jaguar dropping from 8,000 to just 700 new sales units per year once their all-electric program is underway, but also due to their plan to allegedly switch to online-only retail. Now, Jaguar Land Rover swears they're still committed to their franchisees, but hot diggity half damn, that's a rough one. The only update I could find was from the end of July, in which it was said that the two sides would enter into mediation sometime in the fall through the National Automobile Dealer Arbitration Program. But you see, Canadian dealers aren't the only ones upset about this. In an interview with Road and Track, Jaguar Land Rover North American President and CEO Joe Eberhardt revealed that the company is losing dealers in the United States as well, with over 40 dealers turning over their franchises as of February. But this seems to have been accounted for, as future plans indicate that Land Rover franchises will pick up the slack and sell the other three model ranges, with Eberhardt stating, quote, "We will probably have between 120 and 130 that have all four brands, and then a smaller number, between 50 and 70, that only have Defender, Discovery, and Range Rover." End quote. Now, you know me. You know me. I've never been one to stick up for the dealerships, but this is a uniquely twisted situation. As reporter Sam D. Smith explained in his article on the situation for Car Scoops, it all started in 2013 with Jaguar selling dealers a dream with their plan to expand worldwide sales to the tune of 1 million cars per year. 1 million cars per year, that was the goal. Now, for the Canadian dealers, goals were set to a more modest level, some 12,000 Land Rovers and 8,000 Jaguars. Okay, that's... yeah, sure. For the whole country? Yeah, no, that's totally doable. Except, well, the dealers would need to pony up to help make this expansion a reality. As Smith explains, quote, "Each dealership typically spent around $20 million on new facilities and splitting floor space equally. But despite early success, with a high of 4,620 Jaguars sold in 2017, sales soon tapered off, with just 1,118 shifted in 2023. Under the brand's new reimagined strategy, many dealers are even skeptical that the brand will be able to meet the goal of 700 units when a new ultra-luxury EV is introduced in 2025. The new EV is expected to be priced at $125,000 in the US." End quote. Now, this was before delivery expectations for the new GT were revised to 2026, which means this situation has arguably grown more dire for dealers, who likely weren't expecting the gap to be this significant. Jaguar Land Rover tried to put a band-aid on the situation by allowing some dealers to forego selling Jags entirely in exchange for an extra allotment of Land Rovers, which typically sold better. But the frustration is understandable when it feels like you were sold a bill of goods from a company who decided to abandon one strategy that they were super gung-ho about in favor of a different strategy that is now getting all of their focus, yet has no proven likelihood of doing any better than the first strategy did. However, the sales reality of the company has made it so that they might not have any other choice but to accelerate efforts to electrify in the face of a changing marketplace that just didn't want what they were offering. They had the big plan to sell 1 million cars a year, but by the end of 2017, they were only managing about 179,000 cars worldwide. And as referenced in the earlier Road and Track article, the number would only fall significantly further by 2023. And what's wild is that this period beginning with the 1 million car goal in 2013, this was a period where they should have been selling better, with a viable BMW rival like the XE, or the E-Type supercharged spiritual successor, the F-Type, which I spent a good 20 minutes glazing on last week's Race to the Bottom, or the commercially formidable XF Saloon. But it just wasn't happening for the brand, and if they're having trouble selling the kinds of cars they've been traditionally renowned for making, then I'm not sure how the solution is, let's make less of that and also charge more. Now, in his interview with Autocar, Glover states that they've chosen the price point they have as part of a value over volume approach, which just sounds like someone realized they could find new ways to say quality over quantity in a way that would impress a very specific kind of corporate executive and literally no one else. But here's the thing. Jaguars are already cost prohibitive to most people, and this would make them even more exclusionary at the cost of whatever lingering tether remains to the heritage that draws the consumer base to their products in the first place. Which is not to say that all car companies aren't eventually heading in the electric vehicle direction, 'cause yes, this is something everybody's going to have to reckon with eventually. But Jaguar is accelerating efforts in a way that doesn't seem to be borne out by the current marketplace. On the one hand, electric vehicle sales are seeing steady and continued growth, but you also have to recognize that growth is relative. So while the steady sales are an improvement over the periods in which people were more resistant to the idea of driving an electric vehicle, that doesn't necessarily mean the infrastructure exists yet to support every electric vehicle manufacturer hitting their pie-in-the-sky sales quota. And I don't know if the market is ready to sustain a line of electric vehicles from a brand who had trouble turning profits on gas-powered vehicles and isn't really known for their EVs in the first place. And look, you gotta try, But one would think you'd sort of ease into it, not just ram it in there dry. For his part, Glover acknowledges that things like range anxiety and infrastructure are still a concern, but he feels Jaguar is in a good position to handle those issues, citing the superior range and quick charging of their SUVs. From what I could find, prior to its discontinuation, the I-Pace generated roughly 292 miles of range on a single charge. Although that was from Jaguar's website, and again, it's a discontinued car on a platform that their new EVs won't even be using. But still, the idea is that this is a company that's only going to improve once all of its resources are poured into the EV space, as the upcoming GT is expected to generate somewhere around 430 miles of range, and in the neighborhood of 575 horsepower. It's an ambitious range goal, particularly since estimates are not always the same as the realized number. But I also recognize that some EVs can exceed estimates by quite a bit sometimes. The margin of error cuts both ways. Regardless, it does seem, at least from what executives are saying, that electrification is what Jaguar had to do for the future of the brand, since things were even worse than what we might have imagined when it comes to the profit margins on some of these cars. It's kind of rare to hear executives throw their company's own product line under the bus, but that's more or less what happened at Jaguar Land Rover's Investor Day back in July. In talking about the 5 discontinued models, the XE, the XF, the F-Type, the E-Pace, and the I-Pace, Jaguar's chief executive, Adrian Mardell, would tell investors, quote, "They're all close to zero profitability products." End quote. Jaguars are expensive for the consumer and, one would imagine, for Jaguar themselves. Obviously, car production isn't cheap, nor is developing and manufacturing an entirely new vehicle architecture, whether it's electric or internal combustion. And their £500 million investment this month towards full electrification more or less bears this out. But while I've talked a lot about cost-cutting measures, I've still never heard of an auto company discontinuing every single vehicle they make except for one, and then taking a gap year like a high school graduate backpacking through Europe doing side quests to pay their way to Amsterdam to do things they'll strongly advise their own kids against doing in 25 years. And what's troubling is that right now, we don't necessarily know that the cars they'll be replacing their internal combustion line with will necessarily be better. They're just going to be different. So what is Jaguar's justification for this approach? Well, to explain that, they kinda had to go on the defensive. In an interview with TopGear.com in September, Rod and Glover talked about the company's decision to go fully electric, declaring what you may or may not have already surmised from the reality of the situation, that even while it's ultimately necessary for the brand, the strategic shift towards EVs is every bit as aggravating for the people in charge as it is for longtime Jaguar consumers, just for different reasons. Quote, "It's been hugely frustrating saying we're going all EV, then nothing." End quote. He later adds, quote, "We decided on this structure in 2021, but cars don't appear overnight. We need to take the brand back to when we made beautiful, desirable cars, not in huge numbers and not having huge numbers of models in the portfolio. Until recently, we were up to 6 or 7 models." End quote. So it seems like the idea is that somehow the luxury car market will hold up better than most because brands can afford to charge these exorbitant prices, since the type of person to buy into these cars new are those unlikely to be deterred by market forces exerting control on their pocketbook. People will pay a premium price for a premium product, right? But you see, there's the challenge. Are the cars going to be worth what Jaguar plans to charge? As Glover states, quote, "It's not just some new cars. It's a complete brand reinvention. With every decision we make, we ask, is this going to make people think about Jaguar the way we need them to? If it doesn't make them want to pay £120,000, we don't do it." End quote. Now, £120,000 comes out to over 155,000 Freedom Francs. That's more than the Audi e-tron GT, the Mercedes EQS, the BMW i7 xDrive 60, and the base price of the Lucid Air Grand Touring trim. And that's just in what's classified as the luxury segment. Jaguar Land Rover CEO Joe Eberhardt seems aware of this disparity, not just in terms of price point, but in terms of deserting a clientele that might not want a fully electric range. Quote, "Obviously, we don't want to leave anybody behind, especially since the brand has such a history, but there does come a point where you just need to focus on the future. It may not be a brand for everybody, and that's by design. I can't tell you exactly what percentage of current Jaguar owners we will leave behind, but clearly given the positioning of the brand and the vehicles, we will lose some clients along the way. It's a difficult decision to make, but brands need to be focused and to decide what their purpose is. We just knew that we didn't want to be another volume luxury brand. That is not something that aligns with the Jaguar philosophy. End quote. This is more or less backed up by Glover, who draws the distinction that luxury brands require a different approach since they aren't about utility, and EVs even more so, as you need to take a variety of other factors into consideration, from charging to customer service. Quote, luxury brands create irrational need. No one needs a Hermes work bag. Going EV only means we need a whole suite of EV services. Don't treat EVs like an internal combustion car. You've got to have an integrated approach to charging and how to manage the client. You've got to have an integrated approach to charging and how to manage the client. End quote. Now, to this end, the Top Gear article states that Glover hinted at Jaguar designing their own wall box charger, which they will set up for consumers because, this was something that the I-Pace caught a lot of flack for, because it apparently relied on third parties for the wall box chargers that ended up not being up to the standard of the price point for the car. Glover himself then talks about how the company plans to get around the issue of scarcity when it comes to public charging stations. The solution? A model which would reorganize multiple EV charging stations under one platform. Quote, we'll have aggregated charging, where you have one membership to use all chargers, including access to the Tesla superchargers. You have to remember, 95% of charging is done at home. For a car with a 700-kilometer range, it's going to be even more, so only a tiny portion of future Jaguar charging will be public charging. End quote. This kind of seems like counterintuitive reasoning, right? We're going to give you 700 kilometers or 434 miles of range, and that should give you the freedom to go on the types of long-distance trips that other automakers won't allow you to because they don't have this same range capability. But also, we're not that worried about public chargers because most charging takes place at home. Except you're not going to be at home, you're on the road, so you'll need a public charger. But the infrastructure isn't there, so here are the public chargers you can use with your membership. Yes, membership, because even if you're not saying the word subscription, it feels like the general direction the auto industry is taking. And gee, everybody's just gonna love that, right? Let's paywall everything and require memberships and subscriptions and add-ons because you can't spell supercharging without upcharging. And look, I'm sure with electric vehicles, the justification is probably that since it requires less maintenance than your traditional gasoline-powered car, you're still coming out ahead on money. Although I would also argue that when an EV does need maintenance, it tends to be specialized maintenance, which would probably cost way more money, but then, what do I know? And even then, they're probably like, well, why are you buying a Jaguar in the first place if you can't afford it twice over? But I've watched enough Caleb Hammer to know that that's not how people generally think. You get what you want, even if it's only barely within your means to get it. And sometimes even when it's not. In justifying the decision to go fully electric, Glover makes a statement that rings true of anybody who's made an automotive purchase that is against their own financial interests. Quote, we've had to do some very painful things, but this is a long-term plan. End quote. But Jaguar's apparent decline seems to be the result of a shifting automotive marketplace that has somewhat passed them by, and their current plan is the result of trying to get ahead of the next shift. The irony, of course, is that part of what has helped keep the Jaguar Land Rover subsidiary alive in the first place was a shift in the automotive marketplace that ended up indirectly saving their hide. Okay, so it's history time, my favorite, but hey, it's okay if it's not yours. Timestamps are in the description. Now, we're not going all the way back, just to an incident that took place about 25 years ago. but it's significant because it created something of a domino effect that brings us to where we are now. Indian industrialist Ratan Tata was the grandson of the founder of the Tata Group, an Indian business conglomerate founded in 1868. While essentially being what many terminally online people today would consider a nepo baby, Tata worked his ass off to be taken seriously by executives within the family company, so that by the time he took over as successor in 1991, he instituted policies to reshape the corporate work structure, like retirement ages and having subsidiaries putting their profits back into growing the company's profile, all while the executives around him objected. But it was all towards building the Tata brand, so it could help all of their subsidiaries. You know, a rising tide lifts all ships, etc. And it worked, as Ratan would quadruple revenue during his 2 decades plus at the head of the company. But he also focused on expanding the various brands the company already held. One such brand was Tata Motors. Now, Tata Motors had been around since 1945, but they weren't exactly internationally known, nor were they known to rock a microphone. They weren't a global juggernaut at the level of, say, a BMW or Honda or Toyota or Ford. Which brings us to the incident in question, which occurred when Ratan Tata approached Ford in 1999 to offer them the chance to purchase Tata Motors. As the story goes, the executives meeting with Tata basically belittled him. They didn't take him seriously at all, wondering what business he had even trying to sell passenger cars in the first place, what qualifications he even had to be in the auto industry, and saying that taking Tata Motors off his hands would be more a favor to him than a benefit to Ford. Again, this was 1999, and Ratan Tata had not even been head of the company for an entire decade yet. So the memory of being overlooked by executives within his own company was likely still fresh in his mind, and the sting of this American company treating him like a lesser businessman just because his was a lesser-known automaker prompted him to put his efforts into making Tata Motors a more formidable car company, with offerings like the Tata Indica and the later Tata Nano. They were minimalist cars, not just by American standards, but by the standards of just about anyone. However, this was a feature, not a bug, as Tata recognized that profits could be made on the basis of affordability. Cheap cars that working Indian citizens could afford was generally good for business because you could sell a lot of them without paying exorbitant money to manufacture something that had a bunch of unnecessary features. If you want to see just how minimalist we're talking, we reviewed a Tata Nano a few years ago in Nashville, and it proceeded to break down towards the end of filming, which, okay, I'm not making the point that it was supposed to be this great car, but rather that Tata was able to make cars more affordable to citizens, which had the end result of turning a struggling automaker into an arm of the larger Tata Group that was now capable of pulling its own weight. So that by the time the automotive crisis of the late 2000s hit and Ford was looking to unload Jaguar and Land Rover onto someone else, Ratan Tata had the chance to do the funniest thing ever. Ford had collectively spent in the realm of $5.2 billion to acquire both companies. $2.5 billion for Jaguar in 1989 and $2.7 billion for Land Rover in 2000. Only to supposedly lose somewhere in the realm of $10 billion over the course of 20 years on Jaguar alone. When they finally caved and sold to Tata, they sold for $1.7 billion, a comparative fraction of what Ford had lost on the investment, and less than half of what Ford had paid to acquire the two companies in the first place. But once Tata had the now Jaguar Land Rover, he took the same focused approach he used to turn Tata Motors around. As detailed in Financial Express's article earlier this month about the feud between Tata and Ford, from which a lot of this information is sourced, quote, Ratan Tata's vision for Jaguar and Land Rover went beyond the acquisition. It was about restoring their former glory. Armed with a strategic approach, Tata focused on 3 key areas: improving liquidity, cost control, and introducing new products. His commitment to turning the brands around was evident through a massive infusion of funds and resources. End quote. The irony in all of this is that, as the Financial Express article notes, the market would experience this seismic shift in the months following the sale from Ford to Tata. Suddenly, luxury cars were declining and luxury SUVs were more popular, which suddenly made Land Rover a very valuable brand to own. The implication here, of course, is that if Ford had simply held on just a bit longer, maybe they would have been able to benefit from this change in the auto industry. But then that would have likely required an additional financial commitment beyond what Ford was willing to make. Ratan Tata, however, was willing to put that extra billion into product development and operational costs, so that by December 31st, 2009, some 18 months after Tata took the brand off of Ford's hands, Jaguar Land Rover officially became profitable for the first time in Lord only knows how long, with a profit of some $90 million. So if Jaguar was doing so well, what the hell happened? Okay, so the situation is kind of analogous to when Chrysler acquired AMC and the Jeep brand. Because of the move away from smaller cars, AMC floundered, while the age of the SUV and all-terrain sort of vehicles kept Jeep valuable in the years that followed. And in the same way, Tata Motors saw a decline in enthusiasm for Jaguar vehicles, just as Land Rover was back on the rise with the change in the automotive marketplace. Now, the XF was successful, relatively speaking, but it wasn't really enough. We talked about the planned global expansion in 2013 that didn't really work out the way Jaguar Land Rover had planned, because by this point, Jaguar had acquired a reputation for inconsistent quality, and it would stick as the 2010s came to a close, culminating in the brand making Consumer Reports' list of the 10 least reliable cars. It got so bad that Tata actually considered selling equity in Jaguar Land Rover and taking on partners to help shoulder the burden incurred by poor reception and sales in China being cut in half. While you could debatably compare this to Stellantis as a situation where the company sees decline because they don't appear to be in touch with what people actually want, I also think there's an element of desperation that kicks in once your parent company decides to write down their investment by nearly $4 billion, as Tata Motors did in 2019. It says a lot that the most press the company has gotten this month has almost nothing to do with the cars themselves, but rather the sad passing of Ratan Tata on October 9th. Now, while I don't want to compare everybody to Lee Iacocca, Ratan Tata commanded the respect of his company and appeared to be a fairly beloved figure who turned an auto brand around and then subsequently saw it flounder once he'd given up executive powers, per his own retirement mandates. But he was also a philanthropist, which more people in positions of power and wealth should be, otherwise what's the point, you know? Yet the effect he had in helping to galvanize a change in fortune for Jaguar Land Rover would have been difficult for anybody to sustain. In much the same way Chrysler couldn't be kept afloat by Jeep alone, Jaguar Land Rover cannot be sustained unless Jaguar pulls its weight. The move towards luxury SUVs in the 2000s gave Land Rover a shot in the arm, but it came at the cost of whatever value Jaguar was able to offer as consumers turned away from your standard luxury cars in the wake of an unprecedented financial crisis. Sure, Jaguar made SUVs. Their sole remaining option right now is an SUV. But just like with EVs, I don't know that Jaguar is necessarily known for their SUVs. And focusing in that direction long term seems like it might risk cannibalizing Land Rover sales, you know? But one way or another, the move toward electric vehicles has forced Jaguar into an opportunity to either resist the inevitable or embrace it in ways no other bespoke luxury automaker would. Because Mercedes isn't going to shelve their entire gasoline-powered lineup at the drop of a hat. BMW isn't going to do that. Hell, Bentley will only be dropping their first EV model in 2026, basically parallel to the release of Jaguar's own GT model, the first in their initial 3-car EV line. Yes, we're closer now than we've ever been to all of these different companies going fully electric, but it's not necessarily the same thing as doing it by the next Winter Olympics. Yet it seems like an inevitability with the way in which the EV market is trending. Reuters reports that global EV sales are up 30.5% this year, with Cox Automotive reporting that while growth is down year over year in the United States, current trends are looking favorable for electric vehicles as a greater selection of affordable EVs become available, consumers are given access to an increased number of discounts and incentives, and we get a more robust infrastructure to support these vehicles at a wider level. But then the affordability argument might be why these positive trends won't necessarily apply to Jaguar. I suppose time will tell if the company proves to be ahead of the trend in a beneficial way, if they did it too early, or even, possibly, if they did this too late somehow. I mean, I wouldn't think so, but maybe in 15 years we'll look at some auto companies that were struggling and think, well, maybe if they went all in on electric vehicles sooner, they might have been better positioned to capitalize on a market that was growing at a more exponential rate than we even realized at the time. Although I'm not sure how they could have possibly gone electric sooner than this, but I don't know. However, I do think, ultimately, the outlook for Jaguar's growth depends on their EV lineup hitting the zeitgeist, not just in a way that makes up for the loss of any longtime Jaguar enthusiasts, but in a way that makes them a known force in the EV space. Yes, they can survive at low volumes and high prices, but to succeed will likely take a great deal more in terms of promotion, mechanical fidelity, and operational integrity. These need to be good cars. I would argue these need to be great cars. They need to be worth 6 figures in perpetuity. And I suppose time will tell whether or not the eventual output bears this out. But what do you think? Is Jaguar authoring their own obituary with this move towards a fully electric lineup? Or making a necessary move in order to give the brand a new lease on life? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely do love reading your thoughts. I mostly upvote and respond from my own private YouTube account since I'm not in charge of the official RCR account, so I guess be on the lookout for responses from Limited Time Roman. But if you liked the video, please consider liking, subscribing, or sharing the video with someone you know who might enjoy it, and let's get a discussion started. And if you'd really like to support the channel, consider joining our Patreon. The link is in the description. Lastly, if you enjoy these videos, I've provided links to some of my other long-form content below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your week.